Hi Nines, welcome to history. So, Mr. Manafia, so today's lesson, the lesson question is, what was life like during the Second World War? Alright, so all the resources that you're going to need for the lessons today will be posted on the Google Classroom. So make sure you look at those resources and you complete any work that is expected of you from those resources and submit it before the deadline. That information will be put up on the Google Classroom, so make sure you do it. So you can submit it on the Google Classroom, or if you have any difficulties, please email me the work so that I know that you've completed it and I can give you feedback from that work as well. Great, so the Dune activity, you are going to complete the low stakes test on the lesson. It's in the lesson slide, so make sure you complete that low stakes test. Stick it in your low stakes test. You don't have to do that because you don't have your books. Then the extension question: what does the gas attack poster show you about how the British prepared for attacks from the Germans during World War II? So that's the question. Okay, the extension question. And in front of you right now is a poster, and it's advising people in Britain at the time how to protect themselves from potential gas attacks. So loads of really good information about how people protected themselves from gas attacks, showing you how the British prepared themselves for it, answering that question. So how to put your gas mask on, if the gas rattle sounds, if you get gas. So loads of advice, loads of support on how to prepare themselves for future gas attacks from the Germans. So make sure you read that poster to answer that extension question and use that information, please. Moving on. The big question for today's lesson is, how did the events of World War II change the world? And the main learning objectives for today's lessons are to gain an in-depth understanding of what life was like for the British at home at war during World War II, and to build an understanding of how the British dealt with the German threat during World War II as well. Okay, moving on with our learning. So those are the answers for the low stakes test, but we're going to move on. So the key word for today's lesson is affect, verb. The coronavirus pandemic has affected the whole world. Affected. So I'm going to change that very quickly. So that's my mistake. Didn't realize that. Affected. So really quickly. F5. Okay, it has affected the whole world. Alright, so I'm going to go back. Affected, so the coronavirus pandemic has affected the whole world. Touch the feelings or influence someone, something that brings about change. So when you affect someone, you're touching the feelings or influencing someone that brings about change. That's what affect means. Okay, so World War II affected the lives of millions of people in Britain, home and abroad. Okay, so it touched the feelings and also influenced people's feelings during World War II. That's what World War II did. Okay. Use your own sentence using the word affect. So make sure you read that sentence to yourself independently, learn it, and use it in a sentence. Moving on. So the PAR reading and task. So attached on the Google Classroom for this lesson is an information sheet on what life was like for the British during World War II. So make sure you read that information sheet. It's got loads of really good key information about what life was like for the British. I want you to then answer all the questions in full sentences from the document that I've attached to the Google Classroom, and then if you finish, you do the extension on that sheet. Every single question that you need to answer will all the information will be on the lesson slides and also on the PAR information sheet, what life was like for the British. Make sure you read it really carefully and answer all those questions in full sentences. All right, if you do that, you will find yourself more confident. Bless me. You'll find yourself more confident in answering the exam question that you are going to do at the end of the lesson today. So make sure you do that well. Okay? So the exam question for today's lesson is, explain how the Second World War affected the British from the years 1939 to 1945. And this is an 8-mark question response, which requires you to answer it in a 2-peel paragraph. So what to consider? So if you read really carefully the information sheet on what life was like for the British, these are some really good key examples of things that really affected and events that really affected the British during World War II. So, for example, rationing, millions and millions of civilian deaths, home abroad, the fact that the British were waiting to be bombed by the Germans and how they responded to it, and also evacuation. Especially women and children were moved from towns and cities to countrysides, away from their families, living with strangers, and it really affected them. Think about how it affected them at the time. So, a model pill paragraph that answers that question. Explain how the Second World War affected the British. So, one way that the Second World War affected the British was from evacuation. So that's your point. Now give an example. For example, women and children were evacuated to the countryside to keep themselves safe from potential German bombings in cities. This meant that evacuees, people that left their hometowns and were moved to safer places, had to leave their homes, live with strangers, and miss their loved ones home and abroad. This paragraph shows that evacuating affected civilians who were very sad, confused, and forced to live with strangers during World War II. Okay, so that's a really good pill paragraph that I've written answering that question. Explain how the Second World War affected and changed the feelings of the British from the years 1939 to 1945. All right, make sure you write that in a 2-pill paragraph. The big check. What does affect mean? What year was World War II? What effect did rationing have on the British population? How many soldiers died during World War II? And why was the experience of soldiers awful in the trenches? So these are your big check questions that I want all of you to answer on the document that I have attached to the Google Classroom for this lesson. That is the lesson completed and done. Make sure you've completed every task that is expected of you. Make sure you submit this work. I will put in a deadline on the Google Classroom of when to submit the work. If you have any issues or concerns, email me and email me the work when you've completed it to a really fantastic standard that I expect all of you to complete it. Great. Thank you very much for your time, Year 9s, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care and enjoy the lesson, enjoy the learning, and look forward to reading it when I get the time. Thank you. Bye-bye.